Welcome to the Paradise Paradox. I'd like to present this interview with my friend Chris Guida, and Chris is also my co-host on the Multiversity Project podcast, which is a podcast for higher dimensional learning. Now, Chris is quite a character. I like to say that when he makes a statement, he almost always will have a carefully reasoned argument to back it up, and we'll get into some of the reasons why that is in this episode. I always remember when I first met Chris, one of the first things he said to me was, "So, what do you think about the nature of objective reality?" In this episode, we talk about what it means to be an open-minded person and the kind of experiences that you need to have to become an open-minded person. Also about Myers Briggs personality types, and we talk about horizontal versus hierarchical organizations and what's going to happen in the future and how cryptocurrency plays into that. Now, remember, you can check out the Multiversity Project. The URL, the website is multiversitypodcast.com. You can also look us up on Facebook, on Instagram, and YouTube. So I hope a lot of people out there, this will spark their interest because we've got some great conversations with very interesting people happening there on the Multiversity Project. And in the coming weeks, I'll be uploading more interviews with my co-hosts, with Katie Kelly and Ariel Friedman. And we had some very interesting conversations with them as well, talking about their life story and how they evolved gradually to think in the way they do today. So thanks so much for tuning in. Let's get into it.
When you have three people in a conversation, I feel like that's the ideal number of people to have in a conversation because everybody gets to say what they want to say. If you have two people in a conversation and it's not an interview, it's just a dialectic, a lot of times you get these kind of pauses and the conversation kind of dies for a bit. If you have a third person, the third person just fills those silences. If you have a fourth person, there's always going to be one person who has to talk a little bit less than everyone else in order for the conversation to go smoothly.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing about it. And people have said, like, I remember there was Rupert Sheldrake and Terence McKenna, and I forget who the third person in the conversation was, but they always said that, they did this for years before podcasting. They had a tape recorder and they just sat it in the middle of the table, and they would just have these, 5-hour long conversations.
Right.
And they experimented with it a lot with two people and with four people, whatever. But they said 3 was almost always the magic number where enough people get the input and there's fresh ideas rolling over and everything.
Yeah. And, I actually figured this out early in life because I grew up in a house where there were 4 kids. And so I was the kid that was the quiet one. I was the kid that didn't get to talk as well as everybody else. But that made me into the sort of person where I'm just thinking about it, I'm listening to it, and then eventually, like, I'll save my opportunities to talk if there's a rare moment that I can get a word in edgewise. I save up something intelligent to say in those moments.
Yeah.
Of course, I've become less that person. I've become a lot more extroverted since childhood. But I noticed early on, like 3 people seems to be a good number.
Yes. So, talking about your childhood, is it trying to tie this in and to maybe talk about your life story a bit? Do you think you're an open-minded person?
Yes, I think I'm one of the most open-minded people I know.
Yeah. Well, I think that about myself as well. But
I
always, thanks. I always wonder, what is it that made me open-minded? What is it that enabled me to consider so many ideas when I see so many people who get emotionally reactive and then they just shut down, they put up this big wall? And of course, it happens to everybody, but to you and me, I think, and Ariel and Katie, and for example, I think it happens less. So what kind of factors do you think went into that?
What happens more with us and less with Ariel and
Less,
Katie?
no, less. Sorry, less with all four of us. That
Less with all four of us. Okay.
Yeah, that we don't put up these emotional barriers against new ideas.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it is just our personality types. I think if you want to talk about Myers-Briggs, I think we're all basically INTPs or some slight variation on that. Just having grown up that type, I'm very familiar with it. And one of the things that kind of my main priority in life is not being wrong about stuff. It's just the worst feeling ever when you're wrong about something. And so, the INTJ type, their priority is being right. And so they're actually wrong a lot because they want to, they want things to be settled. They want there to be answers to things. And so I think the more perceiving types are more afraid of that than they want to. They're more afraid of being wrong than they want to be right. And so they're kind of just always aware that all of their beliefs are wrong in some way. And so for me, I'm just constantly seeking out ways that my belief system could be wrong. Because when I experience those moments of being wrong, it's uncomfortable, but that's how you grow. That's how you become wiser, by being wrong.
So I'm not excessively familiar with the Myers-Briggs. So what INTP, what does each one stand for?
Well, so the first letter is I or E, which is extrovert or introvert. The second letter is that's just your attitude, your approach to life. Are you chasing after things, or are you letting things chase after you? Okay. Another way to put it is are you it's socially, basically, in a social setting. Like, do you go seek out social interaction, or do you kind of let social interaction come to you? Do you recharge by hanging out with strangers, or does that kind of drain you? And do you recharge by being alone? So that would be extrovert versus introvert. The second letter is S and N, or sensing and intuitive. And that's kind of, S's are 85% of the population, N's are 15% of the population. S's are more concrete. They like sensory experiences. They like details. They stay kind of down to earth. And N's are kind of head in the clouds. They think about concepts. They think about abstractions. They
about big picture.
Big picture, exactly. They don't like to concern themselves with details. They might be kind of attention deficit, type people, although sometimes they're not. Yeah, and they like to have deep conversations. We're all N's on Multiversity, and a lot of us were N's in Crypto Hippies. And then the third letter is T versus F, thinking versus feeling. That one's pretty self-explanatory. The more logical, analytical people are T. The more emotional people are F. This is kind of, which one do you trust more? Your emotions or your reasoning ability? Which one is going to win in a battle, basically? Right.
Yeah. So that's the thing. When I first heard about this, I thought, well, everybody uses those things to some extent, but it's like, which one is dominant? It's not like you're just going to say, I'm only going to make decisions purely based on my emotions or purely based on reason.
Right, exactly. And actually, if you go really deep into Myers-Briggs and Jungian typology, the where the types come from is that we have these 8 cognitive functions, which are thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensing, the 2 middle letters, and the introverted and extroverted versions of each of those things. So that's 8 cognitive functions. And everybody has all 8, but the order that you prefer to rely on them and use them it determines your type. And the low resolution version of Myers-Briggs is, you get this one type and you just use it for all of your life. The higher resolution version is you're using all of these functions, and the ones that you use the most get better and you use them more. So you tend towards this kind of stable configuration, but you can work on the functions that you're not as good at if you're trying to improve yourself, and that can change your type. And I've definitely experienced that at least once in my lifetime. So, but anyway, the last letter is judging and perceiving, J and P. And that's just P. P people tend to be more just chill, laid back. They don't like things to be black and white. And this letter is kind of a little bit more complicated than the other letters, because what it actually means depends on what your other letters are. So like if you're an FJ, that means you're really organized with your. So a J would be somebody who's organized and structured. And a P would be somebody who's a little more chaotic. What's that?
Anally retentive.
Yes, exactly. Freud would call it anal retentive versus anal expulsive. That's J versus P dichotomy. But like an FJ would be somebody who's very structured about emotion, and a TJ would be somebody who's very structured about analysis and reasoning.
Structured about emotion. So it would be like somebody, if you ask them, if they're in an emotional situation, you ask them, what are you feeling right now? And they're like, well, I'm frustrated with a tinge of self-doubt. Something like that.
Yes. I mean, I've never been an FJ, but my understanding is it's something like that.
Okay. I've never had
my little sister's an FJ.
Yeah. Okay. I've never had anyone respond quite like that when I ask them how they am, but how they are. But
how are you, Am?
How am we all? How amn't we be?
Really good. But so the Myers-Briggs thing is kind of like it doesn't. It's more of a like useful way of looking at the world. It doesn't have much bearing on science and data. There isn't a lot of like statistics you can do with these personality types. There's another personality system called Big Five, which apparently was derived from meta-analyses of all sorts of personality traits and just finding clusters in the data. So that one I'm not as familiar with, but it's supposed to be better. So,
well, when I've noticed it's quite popular in corporate environments, but every corporation seems to have different names for this, but it actually goes back to an old Roman system based on the four humors. So you have like blood, black bile, yellow bile, and I forget what the other one is. Phlegm, phlegmatic. Phlegmatic. That's it. So these are like, if you plot them on a graph, it's like people who are more introverted and people who are more extroverted, people who are more people-based and people who are more task-based. So a phlegmatic person is somebody who's introverted but people-based. So that's an interesting system as well. I think I haven't thought in those terms for a while, but I think it is quite practical for somebody who's trying to develop an understanding of different kinds of people.
I completely agree. And it totally changed my life when I learned about Myers-Briggs, because I had initially assumed that everybody was basically the same. And I was, of course, being an extremely rare type, I just felt like a complete outcast. I was like, or an alien even. I was just like, I don't get people. Like, why do people act like that? And then I discovered Myers-Briggs and I was like, whoa, people are different from me, like on a fundamental level. And there are people who are very similar to me, but they're just extremely rare. So yeah, that was huge. And then, like it gives you this framework to start working with different types of people and realizing that you should approach people on an individual level. And you can learn a lot about somebody when you first meet them by the similarities they share with others who are like them.
Yeah.
So you can kind of understand people by the previous people that you've met who are like that.
Yeah. So, well, when I asked you, why do you think you like that? And you said, well, it's just my personality type. But what do you think caused you to have that personality type? Is it part genetic, or is it influence of things that happened to your unconscious when you were less than 3 years old, or what could have caused?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure like every behavior, there's a nature component and a nurture component. I would say being three third out of four children, and being that kind of being the second out of two brothers was probably really instrumental in me being an introvert rather than extrovert. My brother was very extroverted. And yeah, just being that kind of taking that role in the family, the backseat in the conversations, that was just a role that I settled into. Yeah, again, if I had been like the firstborn, then maybe I would have been more extroverted. Also, apparently, the month that you're born in has a lot of effect on your personality. People who are born really, really late in the school year, who are younger than everybody else their age, tend to be, I guess, a little more introverted, and people who are born earlier in the school year, who are older than everybody else in their age group, tend to be more like headstrong and dominant and extroverted. So, but yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a genetic component to my personality as well. I mean, I look at my parents and I see, I share. My personality is a combination of theirs in some ways. So, yeah, my dad's an N. My mom's very T. My mom's an I. Neither of them are P. But I think that part of my personality might actually have been a reaction to them being so very J. So they were very organized and structured, and so I didn't need to be.
Okay, all right. So it's like people filling in the gap in the team.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. What about you? Did you? What do you think formed your personality?
Lots of things. So, it's really hard for me to nail down because I think part of it is like the order in the family. I do think because my older brother, he was a boy and he was the oldest boy, so I think my parents were harder on him physically than they were on me. So once parents get an idea of how to parent, they don't slap their kids around as much.
That's absolutely true of me as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fortunately, people are moving away from that style of parenting, but when we grow up, I think it was just a part of life. Yeah. So, yeah, my older brother, I guess he had that more in his mind that force is important. And I think that's when I talk to him about ideas about being strongly critical of the state, he gets very anxious about that, very defensive. Whereas I'm, it didn't take quite as much pain for me to think of an idea like, oh, what about a world without a state? It didn't really bother me. It took some steps to get there, but it was never, I was never like, no, I will not be down with that. There will be no removal of a violent institution. So I think that's a factor in it. And I don't really know, like it's very hard to get to the seed of anything because it's all these multiple causes. Like I've told you a bit about when I was 17 and I kind of went off the wall and I had this experience that a psychiatrist described as psychotic, and that changed things a lot in my brain. So up to that point, I was probably on track to become like a computer engineer or something. But after that, I decided I wanted to do more artistic things like making music and other pursuits.
So the episode had an effect on your brain, or the sort of diagnosis of psychosis had an effect on your brain?
The episode, well, not the diagnosis particularly, but like the sessions with the psychologist helped me gain some self-knowledge and understand what was going on with me and look at my beliefs more critically, which is something very valuable at that period. So that was an influence as well. But I remember even before that, like I had this friend and he was very analytical. He might, like today would probably say, well, maybe he's on the spectrum a bit, uh, and quite far along the spectrum, like very, I guess, anally retentive, or what was it? He was very like,
J, yeah,
yeah.
judging.
So yeah, everything has to be categorized. I mean, I'm sure you know people like this. Everything has to fit into a neat little box, and very scientifically materialist. So any idea about psychics or energy or spirit, he would just reject it out of hand, and he'd always be ready with a rationalization like, no, that could not happen. Here's what happened, and I'm 100% sure of it. And I was like, well, how can you be so sure? So I remember having this conversation with him. We must have been about 16. And a friend of ours had been high on cannabis, and he was driving a car. And during the car trip, he's got like 2 or 3 passengers. He starts to say, man, I'm not fit to drive in this moment, because in that moment, his consciousness, this is his experience, consciousness is floating about 100 meters above the car. He's having this out-of-body experience while he's driving. And
oh my God.
so talking about that with my skeptical friend, and he's like, well, obviously what happened is that he had a kind of hallucination, and that's it. I was like, well, but what if it was real? What if there was something to that? Like that has so many implications for just about everything in our lives.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, I wasn't just going to let the idea go.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, you and I are the ultimate skeptics, and we're constantly questioning people who are so sure about stuff, Well, maybe you should be more skeptical. But
yeah.
sorry. So.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, it's funny because people identify as skeptics, but they're not. They're skeptical about certain things. Like,
right, exactly. They're skeptical of supernatural or weird explanations for things.
Yes.
When their own explanations might just be totally wrong.
Yeah, that's right. And we're all kind of subject to those biases. So have to be really careful in that jungle of ideas out there. But yeah, I was going to say, like, all of my parents or all my family kind of has some of that straight down the line rational materialistic thinking. There's that thread in my family, and my friend was like that too. But for some reason, I wasn't so seduced by that, and it's really hard for me to say why exactly that is.
Yeah, well, I think it's because you're an ultimate skeptic. And actually, I think you and I are two of the most skeptical people that I know. Anything can be a religion. Anything can be an ideology. Even science. And a lot of people are in that scientism. Exactly. A lot of people are in that religion, and they're just like, well, scientists say this, and so it's obviously right. And it's like, what? Like, science has been wrong like every time it says anything. Like,
yes.
It takes a maybe it makes useful predictions, but there's always a higher resolution version of how we potentially understand reality.
Yes.
So yeah, I think we're just ultimate skeptics, and I think we're anti-ideology, right? Like we don't want to be dogmatic about stuff, except maybe that's our religion, maybe just the religion of skepticism.
Yeah. But I guess the other side of it is, I mean, sometimes I do find myself getting emotional about things and rejecting ideas, and I wonder how to cut that down or reduce it so I can just be open and kind of relaxed all the time, because it's like a primal thing. So Eckhart Tolle talks about this, like when you start to identify with an idea, and then when that idea gets challenged, you feel like you're fighting for your life because it's like your ego is going to die if you don't win this argument. And it's not a very fun way of living.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you want to find something that you can, you need to find something that is ultimate truth for you. You need to attach your identity to something that won't disappoint you, at least during the course of your life. Right. And things are always changing and things are always constantly in flux. And most of the beliefs that people have are pretty vulnerable. They're pretty precarious. They're, nothing is, as far as I can tell, nothing seems to be really just absolutely true in all contexts, except except things are just constantly changing. So I think that's something that I can actually be really confident about. I can be really confident that pretty much nobody really knows anything.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
But what were you saying? So you wanted to become better at being less emotionally tied?
Yes, being less emotionally tied to ideas, or if I find out I am emotionally tied to an idea, I just let go of the expectation or let go of the defensiveness, that kind of thing.
I mean, for me, like when I'm finding myself becoming sort of ensnared by an ideology or a dogmatic belief, my reaction is to go further into that and to challenge it in as many ways as I can. And eventually I always find a weakness. And then I don't identify as much with the idea.
Right. Yeah, good point. Well, yeah, well, it's like I told you that story about taking that ayahuasca journey, and the guide said to me in the integration session about being self-demanding, autoexigente, and I was thought about it later, and I was like, hang on, if this isn't true in some way, why am I resisting it so much? So it was uncomfortable because I'm like, okay, now I know I'm having the resistance, and I also know there's probably something true about it. I'm still resisting it. That's that's how you grow.
Yeah, what I do when I find myself just falling into that into kind of an ideology, again, like a sort of black and white thinking. What I do is I become really dogmatic publicly. Like I just start talking about how great this thing is that I discovered, and I try to get people to argue with me and throw counter arguments at me. And if I talk to enough smart people, eventually somebody finds a weakness or I find a weakness. And yeah, that's my strategy. So, I mean, sometimes you can find the weakness just by introspecting and reflecting. But for me, it's easier to just talk to other people because it's easy to convince yourself that you're being broad and open-minded when it's just you cycling through your thoughts. But when you talk to other people, then and when you try to challenge an idea, when you make a very confident statement about reality, and you make the same statement in front of hundreds of people, dozens of people, and all of them are kind of convinced, then maybe you're right. But usually that doesn't happen.
Yeah. Well, there's always, even if you're mostly right, sometimes you need some nuance, and there's a whole bunch of things that happen, a whole lot of subtleties.
Because when you're really dogmatic about something, it kind of triggers that response in people to be like, no, this guy's wrong. And it triggers them to come up with their best argument against what you're saying. So that's what I do. I play devil's advocate,
Right.
But if I don't have a really strong argument against something, I just defend it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's kind of like, I forget what the name of the law is, but it's like you can ask a question on the internet. People won't necessarily tell you the answer, but if you post the wrong answer, you'll get like 100 responses.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah, well, that's interesting. It seems like that there is that element of human nature that's it's pretty consistent where people do want to be skeptical of really bold ideas.
Yeah. I mean, a good example of this is the book The Game, which I just finished reading. And I was like, this is so great. Why didn't anybody teach me this? And then, you know, I heard some responses and now I'm much more skeptical than I was.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. There's some interesting stuff in there. What was your favorite part, or what was something that opened your eyes a bit?
I mean, so a lot of it, you know, you read it and you're like, I already know this. A lot of it is, yeah, it's just social dynamics. It's just, you know, how do powerful people, well, yeah, how do they operate? You know, how do they get to where they were? How do they get to where they are?
Hmm.
And once they are where they are, how do they manage to maintain that position of sort of confident control? So I forgot what your question was. What am I answering?
Which part affected you the most? Or which part changed your thinking?
Yeah. So you read about some strategies and you're like, yeah, I already know about those. And then you read about other strategies and you're like, yeah, that would be a good idea. That would probably work if I tried that.
Hmm.
And so yeah, it's really interesting to read all of these separate experiences from people trying to get laid, you know,
Hmm.
because that's the specific arena for this book.
Yeah, this is
You know,
also about trying to find a life partner and that sort of thing. That's
right? Yeah,
get laid
like
is the
the
easiest way the cheap way to sell it. But
right,
yeah,
right. Yeah, I mean, and I think that he comes to that conclusion at the end of the book. He's kind of just like, yeah, I've been playing this game the whole time, which was, you know, how can I get laid as often as possible by the most beautiful women?
hmm.
And then he kind of transcends that at the end of the story. He's kind of just like, okay, yeah, I kind of won the game, and I kind of like it's definitely not helping me anymore. And like there's a next level beyond that. It's definitely not worth just becoming, you know, like yeah, spending your whole life trying to get laid or something like that.
Yeah. Well, Tyler Durden or Owen Cook, he always says, like, a lot of people get into that. A lot of guys get into it because what they really want is a girlfriend, and they really want to, you know, spend their time with someone lovely that they care about a lot and have common interests in. But if you're thinking about it that way, and you have almost no options in terms of dating, then you're running into a lot of trouble because, like, oh, you'll meet one woman and you'll be like, she's the one. It's you put her on the pedestal, and you have all these problems. And he
Right, and then you
says,
devalue yourself.
yeah, yeah, that's right,
Yeah,
and you
and
kind
then
of
the girl is just
devalue
like, this
her
guy's
as well. In a
yeah, and
sense,
then
yeah,
the girl's like, this guy is really unattractive because he's so yeah, just like he's
needy, clingy,
he's
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's low
Yeah,
self esteem, yeah, yeah, doesn't value his own time.
exactly. And yeah, and I recently figured that out a few years ago
Mm,
that you know, society tells you to be compassionate and empathetic, and that's good. Like you should be that as much as you can, but there's a dark side to that, which is when you stop having boundaries and you
mm,
start just putting yourself below everybody else that you encounter. And
yeah,
when that happens, your unconscious mind becomes very uh, very resentful. It's like, why do you value me less than you value everyone else? And it starts to sabotage you.
mm,
You know, so you have to care for yourself too. You know, you have to love yourself and care for yourself and respect yourself, not just other people.
yeah.
So yeah, I remember being like, oh, boundaries. Boundaries are
Mm.
good, you know, like and then, yeah, and once I discovered that, I became a lot happier because you raise your value
Right.
um, to yourself and to other people. When other people see that you value yourself, it raises your value in their eyes as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I actually that was something that came up on the last ayahuasca journey. Grandma said to me, "Hey, you know, it's great to be friends for other people. Don't forget to be a friend to yourself."
That
Yeah,
is true. Yeah. No, there was this kind of breaking moment that I had at the beginning of 2016, where I had this. I remember I was drinking all this coffee and like trying to force myself to get stuff done and do really challenging things and I was a software engineer at various startups, and I was like, I'm going to succeed. And I just remember at one point I had a distinct experience of my mind just rebelling against me. It was like, no, I'm not your slave. I'm not going to work anymore. And I was like, whoa, I didn't realize you could do that, brain. I didn't realize that, you could just, and this is why I had motivation problems all throughout school and all throughout high school, because I was forcing myself to do stuff that I really didn't want to do.
Huh.
And so that's, like you get to this point, or I got to this point where my brain was like, okay, you're going to take some time off now. And then I was like, okay, this seems like a bad idea. But then I did it and I felt instantly better.
Wow.
I
know it happens with a lot of people where the body will get sick. Is just like, I'm not taking any more of this. Like, you have to slow down, and if you don't listen to it, it will force you.
Yeah. That is exactly what happened to me. Like my body started to fall apart.
Wow. So you just took a holiday, or what happened?
Yeah. So I tried to save up enough money to take off a few months from work. So I did that. And then kind of as soon as I achieved that, I had that kind of breaking moment that I talked about, where my mind was like, I'm not motivated to do this anymore. Like I need rest more than I need anything else right now. I need rest, and I need some self, I need some alone time to just to hang out with myself and discover who I am and figure out what I really want. Because the problem was that I hadn't done that ever. I'd never really figured out the things that I liked. And so, when you give a gift to somebody and it's a good gift, then they like it because, it makes them feel good that somebody understands them to enough to give them something that they like. It's an indicator that you know the person well. And you can do that with yourself. You can give yourself gifts, and then your body becomes more your body and your mind become more cooperative. You become friends with yourself. And it's like I realized, like, oh, I'm actually like I'm not just my conscious mind. Like you go through life thinking that your conscious self is your only self, and then you realize that there's this whole other part of you that, I mean, maybe this is just because I was unhealthy. Maybe everybody doesn't have this experience, but you have this unconscious identity that's just waiting for you to get to know it. And the more time you hang out with it, the better you get to know it. And when you can give it gifts, you can do things that it likes, and then you become friends with it. And I likened it to being a captain of a ship. Like the ship is your unconscious mind, and the ego, or the conscious mind, is the captain of the ship. And the captain, if he's a good captain, can have a lot of power and control over the ship, and the ship can be very successful. But the captain can also be an evil dictator. Can also be way too demanding of the crew. Not include the crew in on decisions. And at that point, the crew can mutiny, and at that point, the captain loses control. And so, that's when things get rough.
Okay. Well, what would that look like? I mean, you're talking about, I guess people have nervous breakdowns and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you could call what happened to me a nervous breakdown. Yeah, that's what it was. I mean, it wasn't dramatic. It was just, sorry guys, I can't work anymore. You're gonna have to take this without me. I have to go spend some time alone because I literally cannot focus on work. Yeah. My pain is too distracting.
Right. Well, you haven't really gone back to being a software engineer since then, have you?
No, not really. I want to, and I'm going to, but not in as intensive a way as I did before. being a software engineer is, and I suspect this goes for being any type of engineer or really any type of employee. Like, you're solving problems for people. You're not creating things. And I think everybody has a need to create things, to express themselves. And so just being a software engineer by itself doesn't really allow you to do that, especially if you're working for other people. So you're mostly solving other people's problems. So what I wanted to do is work for myself and create something artistic using my software engineering skills. And so if and when I get back into software engineering, that's the way I'll do it.
Do you have anything in mind?
Oh, I have a lot of things in mind. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe
so
you
this,
don't want to share them. It's a trade secret or something.
not really. I mean, I have a lot of interests. Music, the podcast that we're doing, Multiversity, and pretty much all of those things can be improved by knowing how to code and writing some code that does something useful. So one of my favorite music groups, Infected Mushroom, the main producer guy, when I met him, I talked to him and I was like, how do you guys produce those sounds? And he was just like, I programmed them myself. And I was like, wait, you like write code and it becomes music? And he's like, yeah. I was like, whoa, that's definitely something that I need to do. Online media, websites, all of those things are things that I can potentially have creative control over, and use my software engineering skills to further that endeavor.
Have you ever seen those clips of, what is that group called? Glitch Mob?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've seen them. I saw them live at Burning Man 2013. Wow. I've seen them live at least 3 or 4 times, maybe 5 times. I'm not sure.
Wow.
It's been a long time.
Yeah,
they're awesome live, actually. You should definitely see them live.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, there's an interview with one of the guys from Glitch Mob on Duncan Trussell. You should check that out sometime. It's very interesting. It's the way he talks about the creative process and everything.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been noticing the importance of having a mentor when you're learning a new skill, or at least recipes. For me, I find it very hard to just pick up a new skill unless I have a mentor. If I have somebody that's just kind of nearby that I can ask questions of, then I learn very fast. And this is one of the reasons why I got kind of frustrated with being a software engineer. Because when you first join a software job, it's really exciting and fun because you have all these people teaching you all the new skills that you need to do the job. After 6 months or a year, you are pretty much where everybody else is, but you're still, politically, you're still at the bottom of the ladder. And so you still have to follow everybody else's orders, even though essentially your skills are the same or more than theirs. And that's really annoying. It's like, why are you making the engineering design decisions? Like, why can't I make the engineering design decisions?
Yeah.
And there's no way to really, I mean, if you're really good at presenting your idea, and convincing everybody that your idea is good, then that's how you move up the political ranks at a company. But I've always just been really bad at that. So that's a useful life skill that I should get better at.
Yeah. Well, it does sound like it opens the door to a more looser hierarchy in corporations, which I expect that corporations will keep developing things like that. Yeah,
corporations are very political and hierarchical. And I just was like, I can't play this game.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna play it.
Yeah.
Just gonna leave.
Yeah. Well, I remember I had this job doing data entry in a bank, and for many months they didn't measure our statistics, or they didn't have the system implemented to measure how much work we were doing. Eventually, when they did it, they were like, "Oh, Kurt, you're great at this. You're doing 300% of the quota." I looked at some of the stats. I noticed some of the people were doing like 20% or something like that. And I was like,
Oh
what
my
is this?
God.
Like,
Yeah. You were
why?
doing 15 times more.
Yeah, I'm doing,
Yeah.
you know.
That's how software engineering is too. Like the top 10% of the software engineers do 90% of the work.
Right.
And or 90% of the useful work. There's a lot of useless work that happens too that that just adds complexity. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So it's, it's really funny how they have those models, which in a way they're rewarding mediocrity. And I had this
exactly.
guy in our office he wasn't the best data entry guy, but he was good at schmoozing, and he seemed to spend a lot of his time like ordering me around, even though he had absolutely no reason. He had no title, and he had no no reason to order me around. It was just
Yeah.
he's trying to justify the fact that he doesn't work as hard, and he was very good at justifying it.
Yeah. And I think you find in especially larger companies, you find that most of the management hierarchy is people like that.
Mm,
Just sort of more or less useless people who are good at politics.
yeah, so it's a bit scary. I mean, yeah,
Actually, of course, politics works that way. Government works that way too. It's the same thing.
yes, except there's probably more cutthroat than in an office, I think.
Uh, I think you find cutthroat people wherever you find hierarchies.
Yeah, it's
uh,
true. It's true.
the more cutthroat people gravitate towards the larger organizations because they can get away
Yeah,
with more shit.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of scary, We talk about free markets and stuff, and we like to believe there's a meritocracy, but it's like there's this other side of it. It's a meritocracy, but not in the way we hoped, not in
Right,
terms of the actual useful skills. Uh,
right.
I did that interview with Dr. Aidan Gregg. I don't know if did you see that one about
I saw
psychopathy?
part one. I didn't see part two yet.
Okay, fair enough. Well, one interesting question that came up late in the interview, I asked Aidan if psychopaths or pococurantes, as he talks about them, have a parasitic relationship with the rest of humanity or a symbiotic relationship. Like, are they just taking and taking and taking, or are they actually taking and giving something? And after discussing it with him and thinking about it some more, uh, it's hard for me to avoid the conclusion that it is a symbiotic relationship. So it's like people need a big, strong leader to stand up on the podium and say, this is how it is. Like the answer is very clear and just listen to me. Or they, point the finger and say, it's the Jews or the Muslims or the immigrants, it's the Mexicans, whoever they want to put as the scapegoat. And then everybody has this easy answer and they can go along with that.
Right. I mean, so I don't know if you can be a leader without being psychopathic. You can be a good leader too. I think what you're saying is that people need leaders. There might be sort of a correlation between the psychopath gene or something like that, psychopath qualities or something like that,
Yeah.
and the sort of natural leader qualities. I think there's certainly a blurry line maybe sometimes between those things. But I think you can take it to a very transcendent, a good level, or you can take it to a very pathological in a very pathological direction. And by that I mean, you don't really need the leader. Just gives everybody a common purpose. The common purpose can be good, or the common purpose can be evil. For instance, JFK gave everybody a common purpose, which was noble, which is, let's go to the moon, let's explore, let's make life better for humanity. That's America's purpose. There also was some, obviously, like the Soviet Union is the evil guys back then. And maybe you're right that without a common enemy, it is hard to sort of unite a group of people. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's right. There are ways to do those things that are good, in a good leadership sense. But I think it's also it's very easy for a psychopath to come up with easy answers. If you have a strong commitment to the truth, it's not easy to give easy answers because the truth is always nuanced and detailed, and there's all these different levels to it. But a psychopath or a poco curante can just get up and say, yes, that's it. And they'll say it with 100% conviction. It sounds like they mean it. And it doesn't even matter if it's true. But
Right.
but it sounds
good. Well, yeah. And there, yeah. So there is kind of the like 80% of humanity that wouldn't understand the noble goal anyway. Maybe that's not having enough faith in humanity. I don't know. It certainly seems that way sometimes. They need like a really low resolution version of the argument to really get motivated, right? If you try and explain to them like this is the thing that we're trying to accomplish, and they don't get it, then they're not going to be on board. So you have to kind of dumb things down to get the average person to, especially for things like nations. Maybe for things like companies, that's not the case. I think you can get everybody on board with a very noble mission with a small group of people. But it's just, when you have a very large group of people, things start to get really unwieldy because communication between human minds just isn't very fast. And so when you get 300 million people who are all trying to do one thing, most people are kind of left in the dark, and there's nothing really to do about it. You can't really do anything about that. So maybe as technology progresses and we all link our minds together, maybe we'll be able to have this kind of transcendent hive mind thing. But right now, it definitely seems, as you said, there seems to be a lot of utility in having just this kind of elite group that maybe has a lot of, unfortunately, psychopathic tendencies, which nevertheless unites everybody and gives them a purpose.
Yes. So that's the thing about it. It seems like there's value in it, but it's not necessarily very long-term value. But it seems, I guess, in a sense, it is long-term value because it seems to have served humanity for many millennia now.
Yeah, I've been thinking about social psychology is just the most interesting thing to me. I mean, it seems to me that there are a couple of different flavors of human relationship. There's the peer-to-peer relationship, and there's the kind of hierarchical master-slave relationship. And it seems to me that one of these is, if you read like Jordan Peterson or something, one of these is sort of the master-slave one is sort of archetypally masculine, right? It creates hierarchies, right? Where there's people at the top, and there's a few people at the top who get most of the stuff, and there's a bunch of people at the bottom who get practically nothing. And then you have this other flavor of human relationship, which is the more feminine version, which is this peer-to-peer relationship. And it's more cooperative rather than competitive. And it doesn't seek to dominate or control. It seeks to, harmonize and synthesize. And it seems to me that both are useful in different situations. The hierarchical system is useful in times of scarcity and fear and stress. And because it can get stuff done faster. It may not be the right thing, but it's the survival instinct. When you feel like you're being threatened by something, that's when you go into that kind of more like centralized mode, where you react quickly to things and you only think about the short term. And so hierarchies are much better at solving those kinds of situations than more flat organizations, because the decisions can just be made faster when one person is making all the decisions.
Everybody has their own role, so that they already know what they're doing. They don't have to stop and have a meeting about it.
Right, exactly. And so but obviously the more flat style, peer-to-peer style of organization is better for the long-term health of everybody. But you do kind of need material abundance. You need comfort. You need to be comfortable. And you need to feel safe in order for that to happen. So if you're constantly in a state of panic or anxiety or fear or something like that, then this can. I'm talking about basically any structure. Like this can happen in your brain. This can happen in a small group of people. This can happen in a large group of people. This can happen in a city. This can happen in a state or a country. The world, can be seen as this kind of structure of cells, where each person is a cell or something like that. And yeah, so when you're feeling like afraid and anxious, then it's like you're preventing that move towards that peer-to-peer relationship. And the peer-to-peer relationship is where healing occurs. This is what happens when you meditate, right? You get into a space where you feel totally safe and comfortable and peaceful, or you try to put yourself into that state. And then you start to heal because your body feels like it has the time and resources to heal. It feels like it's not being threatened. So anyway, yeah, my point is there's this duality, where sometimes this kind of more fight or flight response is necessary, which produces this hierarchy, and sometimes this sympathetic on this side and parasympathetic on this side. Parasympathetic being, you're relaxed and comfortable and you're healing.
Yeah. Well, this is very interesting. It ties into some things I've been thinking about. For a long time, I guess I thought the world was kind of good and evil. Like maybe you point to a cop or a politician and say that guy's evil. But the more I think about it, the more and meditate about it and have weird experiences about it, it seems like there's not really such a thing as good or evil. It's just like everything has its role to play, and it's pretty much all good.
Yeah, that's kind of, as long as, I would say that the highest moral good for me is adding to life. Like participating in life and improving it in whatever way I can. If the world got destroyed, or if all life on the world got destroyed, I would see that as the highest moral evil. Like that's a situation that I would like to avoid. But outside of that, yeah, I think that mostly what people do just instinctively has some kind of good aspect and some kind of bad aspect.
Yeah.
Depending on what angle you look at it from.
Yeah. Well, there was this thing that happened to me. I lost quite a lot of Bitcoin at one point because I used this exchange, which I hadn't used before. And it turns out they either weren't as competent or weren't as trustworthy as I thought. And I wasn't very careful about it. It's called Blue Trade. It's a Brazilian exchange, and I don't recommend it. I did eventually get my money back. It was worth more than it was when I lost it, so no complaints. Anyway.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So the thing that happened is very, very strange. Like I lost the money. I also, around that time, I had my phone stolen, and I had a deal go south where I was trying to buy a laptop and it didn't come through, and I lost money on that too. And then one night I had this vision. I was about to go to sleep, and I saw this white robed figure come to me, and the masculine figure, and he was like, "Hey, listen, don't worry about anything. We're in control of this. We've been manipulating things, actually, so you lose things. But the reason we're doing this," you can look on your face. He said the reason we're doing this is just so you can learn more about stuff. So don't worry too much, and it'll make sense. And I was like, all right, thanks, I guess. But the weird, this does affect the way I see things. I mean, from one perspective, it's just like it's just a dream or something, or it's a hypnagogic experience that happens.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but
you definitely have a much richer, like inner world than I do. You seem to have cool visions of stuff much more than I do, or cool dreams much more than I do. Although I do seem to have dreams and I just never write them down, so I'm sure I can improve at that. But actually, I've actually had the same thought, maybe not from like a voice in a vision, but like just thinking about it. People always talk about how cryptocurrency, how Bitcoin is impossible to use. It's really easy to lose it, and I'm like, well, yeah, like people don't know how to use this stuff, and people like to say, well, it'll never become popular because people will always be bad at this stuff. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't be so sure, because every time bad stuff happens, people learn. And in the the old order, the old currency of power, is military might, is basically violent domination.
Okay,
that's how that is
highly hierarchical.
Yeah, that is the force that has shaped the world into what it is now, and the economics surrounding violence, basically. And what cryptocurrency does is it allows there to be this wealth in the digital realm, which is impervious to violence. So, but it's not impervious to hacking. So the new kind of realm that we're entering, or the new kind of era that we're entering, is this era where digital wealth is really valuable and violence doesn't matter as much. But before we can enter that realm, before we can get there, we have to have individuals and organizations that understand how to keep information secret, basically how to have good operational security, how to avoid getting hacked. And the way to achieve that is precisely by people and organizations getting hacked. And this is painful, but it's not as painful as violence. It's not as painful as like when somebody gets hacked, generally they tell people about it. Maybe not generally, but some proportion of people tell people about it. And then the people who are writing the software and making the hardware and coming up with the solutions make better, more secure software that's easier for people to use. And the people that get hacked learn how to use it better. And so, there's this kind of rough and struggly process of failing a lot until we succeed. And I think you'll see the same thing as we move into smart contracts. Smart contracts are buggy and horrible right now. But the more people find the problems with them, the more secure they will get. And so, I don't know if that's kind of like derailing the conversation a little bit, but
no, that's
really well
part of it. Yeah, because that was with that vision.
There's a larger purpose to all of this.
Exactly. Yes. So part of the lesson for me was that I should take more care of the things, or that is that I should use the things that have been given to me. So I shouldn't just hoard my wealth, but I should use it for something that helps me be happy and helps other people around me be happy, that enriches our lives. And also that I should take care of it, like be conscious of things, like especially with when my mobile phone got taken, I wasn't being conscious of my surroundings, and I wasn't being conscious of where I was. It was like I was in a zombie state looking at my phone. So that was those were valuable lessons, and so it's the same like with my life. Something got taken from me, but that planted the seed for me to have a greater understanding. And so it's similar with the whole crypto economy.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah, and actually, this is I've been thinking about this a lot. I mean, we're coming to the crisis point where there's the thesis, right? There's a dialectic going on, right? The dialectic of history, and right now the thesis is capitalism. The antithesis is anti-capitalism, and you're seeing that everywhere now, where people are like, capitalism is evil, it can never be reformed, shut the system down, destroy it all, and clearly this is at least as evil as capitalism. But I think the synthesis is going to emerge, and the synthesis, of course, is capitalism with strong individuals. Strong moral individuals, people who are good, people who are responsible, people who know how to keep their things secure, people who know how to keep other people secure, people who know how to care for each other and provide for themselves and their families and their communities. And yeah, like the more we fight for that, the more we teach people, the more people fail and learn from their mistakes, the closer we get to the new synthesis, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's really one of the key uses of cryptocurrency to date. I think it's still a big one, charity. So with large organizations like Red Cross or something, if there's an emergency and they need to get people out there, it's really difficult for them to move quickly. But with cryptocurrencies, hopefully somebody of good faith who happens to be in that situation can say, hey, please send me some money and I'll get these people some blankets or, put up a tent so people have a place to stay. And that's happened many times, and it's just amazing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's almost like there's all of these crazy regulatory structures everywhere that prevent certain types of organizations from existing. And what and because the banking system is so heavily surveilled, it's kind of hard for companies that optimally would have some kind of structure that just doesn't fit the regulatory system. Cryptocurrency allows that type of organization to exist. And so I think cryptocurrency opens the door to all sorts of new and exciting ways of organizing people and organizing resources. But I do think that the charitable ones are going to be the ones with the most power at first, because those are the ones that are the least regulated right now.
Yeah. Well, when you were saying about hierarchical organizations and horizontal organizations, I know in some companies they do things like, I think in Google, they'll have a day or a week where they're just like, do whatever you want. And I think there are even some organizations that use that as their entire model. Like they just employ talented people and tell them, work anyway. Yeah. And they come up with things, which is, I mean, you need a lot of funding, at least traditionally, to make that work. But I imagine people will probably start these projects, like say they have 5 people and they're like, well, we'll launch a cryptocurrency to fund this. And each member of the team gets some cryptocurrency, and then they just do whatever comes up and build from there with that natural creativity.
I mean, that is what is so exciting about Bitcoin. It was the first organization of any type to do that. As you said, Google has 20% time, where they get 20% of their time to work on whatever they want. But Bitcoin was the first organization that enabled people to, basically just hold an asset and live off of the appreciation of that asset, essentially, while they're working on it to improve it. Bitcoin is kind of like and all cryptocurrencies, I guess, are this way to an extent. It's kind of like a worker-owned co-op, where where nobody gets a salary. Well, actually, the miners could be said to have a salary, but you don't need any special qualifications to be a miner. You just need some equipment and you plug it in and it runs.
Yeah.
And then you get paid. So it's like this very, it's a decentralized autonomous corporation or a decentralized autonomous organization. And it's a new way of organizing people, which is very free. And it is really amazing to look at Bitcoin's progress and be like, it funded itself. Like it bootstrapped itself from nothing. Like literally it had zero value when they first started, when mining first started, when they launched the Genesis block.
Yeah.
And then eventually somebody sold a couple of pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoins and boom, now it has value. Now people who are holding it can work on it and improve it and just live off of the gains. And they can start, they can launch tokens on Ethereum, or they can launch their own cryptocurrencies, or they can launch, I think what's happening with the Lightning Network is very exciting. They can write these decentralized applications that earn them some kind of regular cash flow. There's no hierarchy. Like you don't have to take orders from anybody. You just kind of work on whatever you want and become the best person that you can become. And yeah, I think that's definitely where I think the world is going, because I think that's where everyone wants it to go.
Thanks, Chris. So remember, you can check out our new podcast that we're working on, the multiversitypodcast.com. And we're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and YouTube.
Yes, definitely check us out.